Number 1. Neopilina. For roughly 380 million years, this animal existed only as a shape pressed into stone. Scientists knew a whole class of mollusks, called the monoplacophorans, from Cambrian and Devonian fossils, low domed shells that stopped appearing in the rock record long before the first dinosaur drew breath. The verdict was simple. They were gone. Extinct. A closed chapter in the history of life. Then, on May 6, 1952, a Danish research vessel named the Galathea dragged a dredge across the seafloor off the Pacific coast of Costa Rica and hauled up 10 living animals from a depth of about 3,570 meters. They were alive. They were feeding. They had been down there in the cold and the dark the entire time. The Danish zoologist Henning Lemke studied the specimens and in 1957 formally described the creature, naming it Neopilina galathiae after the ship that found it. This is what biologists call a Lazarus taxon, a group that vanishes from the fossil record and then, against every expectation, reappears in the flesh. And Neopilina is the founding member of the story you are about to hear because everything on this list follows the same unsettling rule. Extinct so often only means we stopped looking. The animal itself is modest. Its shell is a single low cap only a few centimeters across, so plain that if you found one on a beach, you would take it for an ordinary limpet. But turn it over and it becomes strange. Inside are rows of repeated parts, paired gills, paired muscles, paired kidneys, arranged in a series down the body, as if the animal were built in segments. That serial anatomy detonated a debate that still smolders today. Did mollusks, the group that includes snails and clams and octopuses, descend from segmented worm-like ancestors? Neopilina seemed to whisper, yes. It grazes slowly on the organic scraps that drift down into deep sediment, a quiet scavenger of the abyss. Since that first haul, more than 24 living monoplacophorane species have been identified, many of them at crushing abyssal depths, hidden in exactly the places our nets rarely reach. Modern molecular studies place the group near the very root of the mollusk family tree, though its exact position is still argued, and one analysis in 2011 even tried to link it directly to the cephalopods. Museum specimens still number in the dozens, not the thousands, because collecting one means sampling the deepest waters on Earth. 500 million years, and the shell has barely changed. Alongside the coelacanth, Neopilina became proof that the label extinct is sometimes just a statement about the shallow places we happen to have searched. So, if an entire class of animals hid this long, the obvious question is the one that drives this whole video. What else is the darkness still holding? Number 2. The giant glass sponge. Consider an animal that may have been alive when the last ice age ended. An animal older than farming, older than writing, older than the wheel. Its name is Monorophes chuni, and it builds the largest single piece of biological glass produced by any creature on the planet. The sponge anchors itself to the deep sea floor with one enormous spicule, a needle of pure glass that can reach about 3 meters long and roughly a centimeter thick, driven into the soft sediment like a spun glass mast. The German biologist Franz Eilhard Schulze first described the species around 1904 from material collected on early German deep-sea expeditions. The name Monorophes means single needle, and that lonely giant spike is the key to its most astonishing secret. In 2012, a team led by the researcher Klaus-Peter Joachim studied one of these spicules and estimated the animal was about 11,000 years old. 11,000 years. They read that age the way you would read a tree, by counting growth layers and measuring silicon isotopes locked into the glass, because the spicule grows in concentric rings that record the temperature and chemistry of the deep sea across millennia. This single animal is a living archive of the ocean since the end of the last glaciation. The glass itself is silicon dioxide, the same material as window panes and quartz, laid down molecule by molecule in water only a few degrees above freezing. Monorophes lives on soft slopes at depths between about 500 and 2,000 meters, mostly across the Indo-Pacific, and its long stalk lifts the feeding body up off the seabed into passing currents that carry its food. The glass conducts light almost like a fiber optic cable, and material scientists have studied related spicules as natural optical fibers. The whole hexactin lid lineage, the glass sponges, reaches back more than 500 million years into the Precambrian and Cambrian. Their tissue is a strange fused sheet, a syncytium, that lets electrical signals ripple across the entire sponge to coordinate a response. The construction of the silica is templated by special proteins called silicadins, discovered by the researcher Daniel Morse and his colleagues. But here's the tension that hangs over this creature. That same slow growth in stable, frigid water makes it exquisitely fragile. A single pass of a deep trawl or a mining machine can shatter a body that took 11,000 years to build. It is so delicate that scientists struggle to bring an intact giant specimen to the surface at all, which is part of why it remains so poorly understood. An animal that lives on the timescale of geology rather than biology, filtering the dark, patient beyond human comprehension, and still down there right now. Number 3. Lingula, the lampshell. Some survivors are spectacular. This one endures by being humble. Lingula is a brachiopod, and it is often called the oldest surviving animal genus on Earth, with a fossil record stretching back roughly 500 million years to the Cambrian and Ordovician seas. At a glance, it looks like a clam, 2 valves, and a fleshy body, but it belongs to an entirely separate phylum, the Brachiopoda, a group only distantly related to true molluscs. Its shells are not even made of the usual seashell material. They are built from calcium phosphate and chitin and held together by muscles rather than a hinge. The animal lives buried upright in a vertical burrow in soft sediment, anchored by a long fleshy stalk called a pedicle, and at the first hint of danger, it yanks itself down into the mud in a fraction of a second. It feeds with a lopophore, a coiled crown of tiny ciliated tentacles that pulls in a current of water and filters out plankton and drifting scraps. When Charles Darwin coined the phrase living fossil in 1859, and On the Origin of Species, Lingula was one of the animals he had in mind. Modern genetics has since added a twist. The soft body and the DNA have quietly evolved over those hundreds of millions of years, so Lingula is a living fossil in the shape of its shell far more than in every biological detail. Its real achievement is survival. Brachiopods once carpeted the floors of Paleozoic seas in tens of thousands of species dominating the shallow ocean. Then, 252 million years ago, the end Permian extinction, the event often called the Great Dying, annihilated most of them. And in the aftermath, the clams and their bivalve kin took over the world the brachiopods had ruled. Lingula slipped through. It tolerates low oxygen and brackish water that would kill more delicate animals, and that stubborn hardiness carried its lineage through all 5 of the great mass extinctions, an endurance record almost nothing else can match. Brachiopod fossils are so abundant that geologists use them as index fossils to date Paleozoic rock all over the world. In 2015, scientists sequenced the genome of Lingula anatrna and found shell-building genes shared with molluscs, feeding an ongoing debate about how hard mineralized shells first evolved. In parts of Asia, people still dig up living Lingula and eat it, prizing the stalk as a delicacy. Its name comes from the Latin for little tongue, describing the outline of the shell. There's a lesson buried in the mud with it. While flashier lineages rose to dominance and then vanished, this plain, tough, unglamorous animal simply kept doing what worked, and it is still doing it in the sediment of the deep today. It survived what killed 9 out of every 10 species by doing almost nothing at all. Number 4. The sea lily. They look like flowers, and for a long time people treated them like fossils fixed forever in stone. They are neither. Sea lilies are crinoids, echinoderms, close relatives of starfish and sea urchins, and they are unmistakably animals. A stalked crinoid attaches to the seafloor by a long segmented stem, topped by a cup and a crown of feathery arms that fan open to filter food from the current. The class reaches back more than 480 million years, and in the Paleozoic, crinoids were everywhere. Their gardens grew so dense that entire beds of limestone are built almost entirely from their fossilized stem segments, stacked calcite discs that collectors still find today and once called Indian beads. Then came the end Permian catastrophe, which nearly wiped the crinoids out. Almost every stalked crinoid alive today descends from a small band of survivors that scraped through, and in the ages that followed, the stalked forms retreated into deep water, mostly below 100 meters, many of them hundreds or even thousands of meters down. Because they lived anchored in place, scientists assumed they were essentially living statues, rooted relics filtering the dark exactly as their ancestors had. Then the cameras arrived. Submersible and remotely operated vehicle footage revealed something no one expected. Some stalked crinoids can detach from the seabed and crawl across it, dragging themselves along on their arms at a few centimeters per second. The researcher, Tomasz Baumiller, and his colleagues documented this crawling, and even a kind of running, in the 2000s, overturning the rooted fossil assumption entirely. And they are not moving at random. They crawl to escape slow predators like sea urchins creeping toward them, which means these are active, responsive animals, not passive ornaments. Their close cousins, the feather stars, take mobility further, shedding the stalk as adults and swimming freely by beating their arms, a more agile modern radiation of the same ancient design. Deep-sea crinoids often carry passengers, squat lobsters, and specialized worms, living tucked among their arms, and they can regrow arms and even parts of the crown after being damaged. What survives in the deep, then, is a genuine window into the Paleozoic seafloor, a vanished world of crinoid meadows far richer than anything the modern shallows can show. They feed using tiny tube feet and nets of mucus, trapping drifting particles and passing them down grooved arms to the mouth at the center. The mainstream view once held them as rooted relics. The camera revealed active escape artists, and the deeper truth may be that the pressure of predators drove that mobility all along. A flower that runs. Which forces an uncomfortable question about everything else down there. How many creatures have we misread as still, simply because we never watched them long enough to see them move? Number 5. The sea pen. On the flat, featureless mud of the deep sea floor stands something that looks like a quill pen planted upright in the dark. And when you brush against it, it answers with light. Sea pens are colonial cnidarians, relatives of corals and sea anemones, and each one that looks like a single organism is really a colony of many polyps that all descended from one founder. That founding polyp transforms into a rigid central stalk, the rachis, which anchors the colony into the sediment, while its clones branch off to handle feeding and water flow. Sea pens live from the shallows down past 6,000 meters, so some of them are true animals of the abyss. Many are powerfully bioluminescent, and a disturbance sends waves of blue-green light rippling along the colony, a glowing pulse traveling from polyp to polyp. But the reason a sea pen belongs on this list is its shape. That upright frond looks startlingly like Charnia, one of the oldest complex animal fossils ever found, a frond-like organism that lived more than 550 million years ago in the Ediacaran, before the Cambrian explosion. The geologist Trevor Ford described Charnia in 1958 from Charnwood Forest in England, and it was the first widely accepted evidence of complex life in Precambrian rocks. Because sea pens resemble it so closely, they are often invoked as living analogues for some of Earth's earliest large organisms, a glimpse of what the dawn of animal life might have looked like. There is a caveat, and it matters. Many researchers now suspect the Ediacaran fronds were not true cnidarians at all, but a separate early experiment in large body size that left no living descendants, which would make the resemblance an inspiration rather than a proven family link. Still, the echo is haunting. When threatened, a sea pen can expel water and deflate, retracting into the sediment. It feeds by combing plankton from the current with its tentacled polyps. And on the bare abyssal plain, fields of sea pens become vital habitat, structure in a featureless world, sheltering fish and crustaceans. Some rise more than 2 meters tall. Those sea pen gardens are now recognized as vulnerable marine ecosystems, easily flattened by bottom trawling that drags across the deep. The glow is thought to startle predators or lure prey, and it travels as a coordinated wave through the colony. Whether it is a true relative of the first animals, a separate convergent design, or something in between, the sea pen shows that frond-shaped colonial life, one of the oldest silhouettes in the fossil record, is still standing in the dark, still glowing, still alive. and if it is not descended from the Ediacaran fronds, that only deepens the mystery. Why does it look so much like the very beginning? Number 6. The Bramble Shark. Most sharks are built for speed. This one is built for patience, and almost no one has ever seen it alive. The Bramble Shark, Echinurhinus brucus, is a large, sluggish, deep-water shark named for the thorn-like denticles scattered across its skin, hard bucklers that sometimes fuse into plates and gleam when light catches them. Nothing like the fine sandpaper texture of an ordinary shark. It grows to around 3 meters with a heavy, flabby body designed not for the chase, but for the ambush. It has a close twin in the Pacific, the prickly shark, Echinurhinus cookie, and between them, the genus haunts deep slopes and shelves around much of the world, typically at depths from about 400 to 900 meters, sometimes deeper. What makes it belong here is its lineage. The genus Echinurhinus is the only member of its own order, an isolated and evolutionarily conservative branch of the shark family tree, and sharks as a whole reach back more than 400 million years. This is an old design, quietly persisting while flashier sharks radiated across the surface seas. The bramble shark is thought to feed by suction, expanding its mouth and throat with sudden force to inhale fish, smaller sharks, and crabs whole. It was formally described by the naturalist Bonneterre in 1788, and yet, more than 2 centuries later, its behavior in the wild remains almost completely unobserved. Nearly everything we knew about comes from accident, from individuals hauled up as bycatch in deep trawls and on long lines meant for other animals. It gives birth to live young, which develop from eggs retained inside the mother, a strategy called ovoviviparity. Its sluggish metabolism suits the food-poor deep slope, where waiting quietly costs less energy than hunting, and its reports come in patchily from the eastern Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the western Pacific, each capture often noted in the scientific literature precisely because encounters are so rare. That rarity is also its vulnerability. Like most deepwater sharks, it grows slowly, matures late, and produces few young, which makes the whole lineage fragile against fishing pressure that reaches ever deeper. Is it a primitive relic, a highly specialized deep ambusher, or simply an ordinary animal we have barely managed to watch? The honest answer is that we do not really know, and that itself is the point. Here's a shark 3 meters long, an apex-scale predator with an ancient pedigree, and our entire relationship with it is essentially a series of accidents. Submersibles off California have occasionally filmed its prickly Pacific cousin drifting through the deep, rare, and precious glimpses of a creature that spends its whole life where we almost never look. Number 7. The Sea Lamprey. Open the mouth of a sea lamprey and you are looking at something older than the first forest. It is a round, jawless disc, ringed with concentric rows of hard, hooked teeth around a rasping tongue, and it belongs to one of the most ancient branches of the vertebrate tree still alive. Lampreys are jawless fishes, part of the group biologists call agnathans, and their lineage predates jaws themselves. Fossils more than 350 million years old, such as Priscomyzon from the Devonian rocks of South Africa, already show that same sucker disc mouth, remarkably similar to the animals swimming in our rivers and coasts today. Jawless fishes were among the very first vertebrates on Earth, dominating the seas before jawed fishes rose and largely replaced them. The sea lamprey, Petromyzon marinus, is a parasite as an adult. It fastens onto a host fish with that disc, rasps through the skin, and feeds on blood and body fluids, secreting an anticoagulant in its saliva to keep the wound flowing. It lives in the ocean and coastal waters as an adult, then migrates up into freshwater rivers to spawn in gravel nests and die. Its body is a catalog of ancient traits. The skeleton is cartilage, not bone. There are no jaws, no paired fins, no bony scales. Along each side sit 7 pairs of gill openings, which give the animal the eerie look of having a row of extra eyes. Its larvae, called Amocoades, burrow into riverbed sediment and filter feed there for years before transforming into adults. Together with the hagfish, lampreys are the only jawless vertebrates that survive today, a tiny living remnant of a once vast group, and because their lineage split off so early, they are priceless to scientists trying to understand the origin of vertebrates. Lampreys even have a uniquely primitive immune system built on variable lymphocyte receptors instead of the antibodies the rest of us rely on. A completely different solution to the same problem. The world got a brutal demonstration of the animal's efficiency in the 20th century when sea lampreys invaded the North American Great Lakes and devastated the native fisheries. Some lamprey species never feed at all as adults, living only long enough to reproduce, and the animals have been eaten by people since antiquity, prized as a delicacy in medieval Europe. Is it a frozen relic, a lucky survivor, or a lineage that is still quietly evolving beneath an ancient surface? All three views have their defenders. But strip the arguments away and one fact remains. This mouth, this jawless, rasping disc, is older than trees, older than dinosaurs, older than Jaws, and it is still latching on today. Number 8, the Chambered Nautilus. The ammonites are gone. Those beautiful coiled shells you see in fossil shops died out with the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. But their cousin survived, and it is still jetting through the dark right now. The Chambered Nautilus is the last living cephalopod that still carries a true external coiled shell, the sole survivor of the nautiloids, a group that appeared more than 500 million years ago and once filled the seas with thousands of species, some with straight shells meters long. The living animal occupies only the outermost chamber of its spiral shell. The inner chambers are sealed and filled with gas, and the nautilus adjusts its buoyancy by regulating gas and fluid through a thin tissue strand called the siphuncle, rising and sinking like a living submarine. It reaches out with around 90 sticky tentacles, far more than the 8 arms of an octopus or the 10 of a squid, and none of them have suckers. Its eyes are astonishing in their simplicity, pinhole eyes with no lens at all, an ancient design that still works well enough in the dim deep. Every night the nautilus climbs, rising from several hundred meters down to feed in shallower water, then sinking again by day, a daily vertical migration through the water column. It cannot go too deep, though. Below roughly 700 to 800 meters, the pressure would implode the shell, a hard ceiling on its world. It is a scavenger and predator, tracking carrion, crustaceans, and molted shells largely by smell, and unlike the fast-living, short-lived octopuses and squid, it grows slowly, matures late at around 10 to 15 years, and lives a long time. The spiral of its shell approximates a logarithmic curve and has been used for centuries as an example of mathematical beauty in nature, and its chambered structure gave Jules Verne the name for Captain Nemo's submarine. That beauty is also a curse. Nautiluses are heavily harvested for their ornamental shells, and because they breed so slowly, some populations are in trouble, which is why the animal gained international trade protection under CITES in 2016. In 2015, the biologist Peter Ward helped rediscover a closely related form, Alanautilus, off Papua New Guinea, after decades without a confirmed sighting. The nautilus carries copper-based blood that runs bluish, an adaptation for cold, low-oxygen deep water, and it moves by jetting water through a funnel, gliding backward through the black. Whether you see it as an unchanged relic, a slowly evolving survivor, or a remnant shaped by our own harvesting, one image holds. The ammonites survive only as stone. Their living cousin still drifts up out of the deep every night. Number 9. The Horseshoe Crab. There's a decent chance a 445 million year old animal helped keep you alive, and you never knew it. Horseshoe crabs are not crabs at all. They are marine arthropods in the class Xiphosaura, more closely related to spiders and scorpions than to anything with claws, and their lineage extends back more than 440 million years, with fossils from the Ordovician showing a body plan strikingly like the living animal. There are 4 species alive today: the Atlantic horseshoe crab, Limulus polyphemus, and 3 species across the Indo-Pacific. The familiar horseshoe-shaped shell protects the body, and the long spike of a tail, the telson, is not a weapon, but a lever the animal uses to flip itself back over when a wave turns it upside down. It carries up to 10 eyes, and research on those lateral compound eyes contributed to a Nobel Prize-winning understanding of how vision works. But the horseshoe crab's most valuable secret is its blood, which is blue, because it carries oxygen with copper-based hemocyanin instead of iron. That blood contains cells called amoebocytes that clot instantly in the presence of bacterial toxins, and from them we make a substance called limulus amoebocyte lysate, or LAL. Every injectable drug, every vaccine, every implanted medical device can be tested with it for dangerous contamination, which makes horseshoe crab blood one of the most medically precious fluids on Earth. Hundreds of thousands of the animals are collected each year, bled, and returned to the sea, though some do not survive the process. Each spring on high tides they haul ashore in enormous spawning aggregations, most famously in Delaware Bay, and their eggs feed migratory shorebirds like the red knot, weaving the species into a much larger web of life. Although they spawn in the shallows, horseshoe crabs spend much of the year in deeper offshore waters on the continental shelf. They molt many times over roughly a decade to reach maturity, and they tolerate extremes of temperature, salinity, and low oxygen that would kill more delicate creatures, which is part of how the body plan survived multiple mass extinctions. To reduce the toll on the animals, scientists have developed a synthetic alternative to LAL called recombinant factor C. Is the horseshoe crab a case of true evolutionary stasis, a group hiding cryptic diversity, or a survivor now pushed into decline by our own demands on it? Whatever the answer, the fact remains almost poetic. A living fossil older than the dinosaurs, older than trees, is quietly one of the reasons your medicine is safe. Number 10. The Leatherback Turtle. While the other giants of the dinosaur age turned to fossils, one ancient reptile kept diving. And it dives deeper than almost anything else alive. The leatherback, Dermachilus coriacea, is the largest living turtle and the last survivor of an entire family, the Dermachilaridae, distinct from every other sea turtle on Earth. The turtle lineage reaches back more than 100 million years, and the leatherback type branched away from other sea turtles deep in the age of dinosaurs. It broke the basic rule of turtles. Instead of a hard shell, it has a flexible carapace of oil-soaked skin stretched over a mosaic of small bones, marked by 7 long ridges running down its back. It can exceed 2 meters in length and weigh more than 500 kilograms, with the largest individuals approaching 900 kilograms. And it is the deepest diving reptile ever recorded, plunging past 1,200 meters into the dark. Part of the reason it can survive those depths is that flexible body, which compresses under pressure rather than resisting it where a rigid shell might fail. It also breaks another rule. The leatherback keeps its body warmer than the surrounding water through sheer size, insulating fat and constant activity, a trait called gigantothermy, and that partial warm-bloodedness lets it forage in cold seas from the tropics all the way to the edge of the Arctic, off Canada, and off Norway. Its diet is almost pure jellyfish and other gelatinous plankton, which it eats in staggering quantities, and its throat is lined with backward-pointing spines that trap the slippery prey and keep it from escaping. It undertakes some of the longest migrations of any animal, crossing entire ocean basins between feeding grounds and the tropical beaches where the females return to nest, laying clutches of around 80 eggs, sometimes several times in a season. Its front flippers can span more than 2.5 meters, the largest of any sea turtle, powering those ocean-crossing journeys. But this ancient traveler is in trouble. Several populations, especially in the Pacific, are critically endangered, hit by egg harvesting, accidental capture in fishing gear, and plastic pollution. A floating plastic bag looks almost exactly like a jellyfish, and leatherbacks die swallowing them. An ancient animal killed by an entirely modern mistake. Whether you frame it as a nearly unchanged relic and actively adapted deep diver, or an endangered remnant clinging on, the image is the same. A reptile whose design was already old when the dinosaurs still ruled, still folding its flippers back and plunging into the lightless deep every single day. Number 11. The Sturgeon. The last creature on this list is one you might actually recognize, and that only makes it stranger because it is one of the most genuinely prehistoric fish still alive. Sturgeons belong to the family Accipinceridae, and their lineage reaches back more than 200 million years to the Triassic, when the earliest dinosaurs were just finding their feet. Their body has changed so little since then that they are a textbook living fossil. Instead of ordinary scales, a sturgeon is armored with rows of bony plates called scutes, and its skeleton is largely cartilage, an ancestral trait it shares with the sharks, even though sturgeons are bony fishes. Its mouth hangs beneath a long pointed snout, a downturned protrusible tube fringed with sensory barbels, and it feeds by sucking invertebrates, molluscs, and small fish off the bottom. The largest of them is a genuine leviathan. The beluga sturgeon, Huso, historically grew beyond 5 meters and more than 1,000 kilograms, cruising the deep waters of the Caspian and Black Seas, and descending to great depths between its spawning runs up the rivers. Sturgeons are extraordinarily long-lived, some species passing a century, and they mature very late, sometimes not breeding until they are 15 to 25 years old, which makes their populations agonizingly slow to recover once they crash. And they have crashed. Sturgeon roe is the source of true caviar, and the demand for it has driven species after species toward extinction. The beluga sturgeon is now listed as critically endangered, its wild numbers collapsed by overfishing and by the dams that wall off the ancestral rivers it must climb to spawn. Fossil relatives confirm that the armored, barbell-mouthed design is genuinely ancient and conservative, and the animal even shares another trick with sharks, detecting the faint electrical fields of buried prey through sensory organs on its snout. Some sturgeons famously hurl themselves clear out of the water, a leaping behavior scientists still cannot fully explain. This is a fish that swam through the end Cretaceous extinction that killed the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago and simply kept going. Of the roughly 27 sturgeon species alive today, the great majority are threatened, making them among the most endangered groups of animals in the world. Relic, adaptable generalist, or collapsing lineage, the sturgeon is all three at once. An armored survivor from before the dinosaurs reached their peak, still haunting the deep bottoms of seas and great lakes, still here, for now. Line up all 11 of these animals and a pattern comes into focus. The deep sea is a refuge, and it is very good at keeping old things. Down in the cold and the dark, conditions barely change from year to year, or even from age to age, and that stability slows the pace of change and buffers life against catastrophe. Food is scarce, which favors slow, thrifty, conservative designs over flashy, expensive ones. Depth itself acts as insulation, shielding these creatures from the disasters that repeatedly devastated the surface, the asteroid winters, the swings in ocean chemistry, the collapses that hit the shallow seas. Hardest. Competition is thin, so ancient ways of making a living stay open long after they close up above. And so, again and again, spectacular surface lineages rise and fall while the deep relics simply persist. Neopilina waited in its trench. The crinoids retreated into deep water and survived. The sturgeon endured across 200 million years, but the concept of a living fossil has limits. And it is worth being honest about them. Stasis in outward form does not mean nothing is happening. The genes underneath keep changing even when the shell or the skeleton stays the same. And every one of these rediscoveries carries a quieter message. When we declare something extinct because it vanished from the fossil record, we are often really describing the shallow, well-lit places we happen to have searched. The Lazarus taxon is as much a statement about human ignorance as about biology. There's a sting in the tail, though. The very slowness that let these animals survive deep time makes them terribly fragile now, because trawling, mining, and warming water are finally reaching the last refuges. Which raises the obvious question: if the deep keeps hiding the living among the supposedly extinct, how did those verdicts get overturned in the first place? The overturning has a history, and it has a shape. A Lazarus taxon, named for the biblical figure raised from the dead, is a group that disappears from the fossil record and then turns up alive, and the modern archetype is the coelacanth. In 1938, a museum curator named Marjorie Courtenay Latimer spotted a strange blue fish among a South African trawler's catch, and the ichthyologist J.L.B. Smith identified it as a coelacanth, a fish supposed to have died out with the dinosaurs. Neopilina, in 1952, was the invertebrate version of the same shock. Nautilus, rediscovered by Peter Ward and confirmed alive in 2015, was another. And the number of known monoplacophorans species has only grown since that first Galathea haul. What drives these resurrections is almost always new reach, deeper dredges, crude submersibles, remotely operated vehicles, and now environmental DNA sampled straight from the water. The gaps that make a Lazarus taxon possible form because soft bodies rarely fossilize, because deep habitats preserve poorly, and because we simply have not looked. There is a crucial difference between an animal that is truly extinct and one that is merely undetected, and in an ocean we have barely sampled. Absence of evidence is a shaky thing to build a verdict on. Genetics can confirm a rediscovery or reveal that the living animal is a close relative rather than the exact fossil species, and caution matters, because some claimed rediscoveries turn out to be misidentifications. Each real one, though, resets our estimate of how much ocean remains unknown and feeds the long-running argument over just how little of the sea we have actually explored. The optimists say many more await in the trenches and on the abyssal plains. The skeptics answer that most things that vanished really are gone. The pragmatists point out that the truth depends entirely on how and where and how much we sample. All of which leads to the honest admission at the heart of this whole story. We do not know how many species are still down there. Estimates of undescribed deep-sea life run enormous, and the uncertainty on those numbers is enormous too. We do not know whether other whole classes, thought extinct like the monoplacophorans once were, are sitting unsampled in the Hadal trenches right now. We are not even sure of the true ages and lifespans of the slowest deep animals, which is why an 11,000-year-old glass sponge can still surprise us. Major branches of the Tree of Life remain unresolved, from the exact placement of the monoplacophorans to the real identity of the Ediacaran fronds, and whether those fronds were ever cnidarians at all. There is behavior we have barely glimpsed, the hunting of the Bramble Shark, the full deep-water life of the Nautilus, the meaning of a sturgeon's leap, the rippling light of a startled sea pen. We do not know the true population sizes or trends of most cryptic deep species, and the reproductive biology of many living fossils is still a blank. We are only beginning to learn how climate change and warming water reach into the deep refuges, what deep sea mining will do to nodule fields and vent communities, and how much damage trawling inflicts on sponge and crinoid grounds that took millennia to grow. We do not yet know whether synthetic substitutes can fully replace horseshoe crab blood, whether battered leatherback and sturgeon populations can recover, or how much environmental DNA can really tell us about creatures we have never seen. What deep genomes will reveal about the balance of stasis and change is still unfolding. The largest habitat on the entire planet is also the least explored, and that single fact hangs over everything you have just heard. Come back at the end to where we started. Extinct so often only means unlooked for. The deep sea turns out to be a kind of memory, holding on to forms the surface world discarded ages ago, and there's a strange paradox in that. The oldest survivors, the ones that outlasted 5 mass extinctions, are now among the most fragile things in the ocean, because our reach has finally arrived in the one place that always kept them safe. That reach cuts both ways. It lets us study these animals, and it lets us harm them. What they teach, in the end, is something about endurance over spectacle, about the quiet dignity of a design that simply kept working while louder, grander lineages burned bright and vanished. Every rediscovery humbles the idea that we have finished the catalog of life. Every one of these creatures is a bridge to a world we otherwise know only as stone, proof that the darkness below is not empty, but archival, patient, and full. These are not myths or rumors. They are documented, living animals, and the stakes are real, because a lineage 445 million years old could still be lost on our watch. There is wonder in an animal older than agriculture still filtering the dark, and there is a responsibility that comes with finally being able to see it. So keep looking, and look carefully, because the next Neopilina may already be waiting in a trench we have not sampled yet. Across 5 extinctions, this ancient life persisted far below, and the deep keeps answering back. You are not a spectator to a finished story. You are a partner in an investigation that is still wide open. And somewhere down there, in the cold and the pressure and the endless dark, they are still alive.